In the dry heat of the frontier, where the wind carried dust across wide open plains and the cries of hawks echoed above the canyon, there lived a cowboy named Samuel Kane, a man of grit and quiet honor, whose days were filled with the rhythm of cattle hooves and the whistle of the prairie wind, but whose heart carried a wound deeper than any bullet or blade could inflict, for Samuel had lost the love of his life, his wife Clara, to a fever that swept mercilessly through their small homestead. And though he had fought storms, rustlers, and the loneliness of endless miles on horseback, nothing had prepared him for the silence that followed her passing, the stillness of the cabin that once rang with her laughter, the empty chair at the wooden table where her presence had been as steady as the morning sun, and each evening when he returned from long days on the range, Samuel would pause by her grave beneath the cottonwood tree, whispering words of longing into the night air, trying to believe she could still hear him, though the only answer was the rustle of leaves in the wind, and as weeks turned into months, his grief became a shadow that followed him everywhere, dulling the color of the land he once loved, making each sunrise feel like a burden rather than a blessing, until the day Clara's younger sister, Eliza, arrived on horseback, carrying a worn satchel and a heart full of both sorrow and resolve. For she too had lost a sister, but she had also made a promise to Clara before her final breath that she would look after Samuel and the small ranch he had built with his own 2 hands, and when she rode up the dusty trail, Samuel at first could hardly meet her eyes, for Eliza carried a resemblance to Clara so striking it made his chest ache, though there was a fierceness in her gaze, a determination forged not of grief but of survival, for she knew the land was harsh and the life of a cowboy lonelier still, and she would not see him wither away beneath the weight of loss, and so she stepped into that cabin where the scent of old wood and faded memories lingered, where Clara's belongings still rested untouched, and she began to bring a quiet order, cooking meals, mending clothes, sweeping away the dust that gathered in corners Samuel no longer noticed, and though at first Samuel resisted, feeling guilt at letting another woman fill the space his wife once occupied, little by little he found himself drawn to the steady presence of Eliza, who reminded him not only of what he had lost but of what still remained, a chance for life, for warmth, for laughter once more, and as days stretched into weeks, a bond began to grow between them, subtle and unspoken, in the way she handed him his coffee in the morning with a gentle smile, in the way she rode beside him across the open fields, her hair catching the sunlight, in the way her laughter, different from Clara's but no less sweet, rose like a melody above the endless silence of the prairie, and Samuel began to feel a stirring in his chest he had long thought buried, a fragile hope that love might find its way back to him, though he fought it fiercely, torn between loyalty to Clara's memory and the undeniable pull of Eliza's presence, and often he would sit by the fire at night, staring into the flames, wrestling with guilt and longing, asking himself whether his heart was betraying the woman he had sworn to cherish forever, or whether Clara herself had sent Eliza to save him from despair, and though he found no answer, he could not deny that Eliza's footsteps in the cabin no longer sounded foreign but familiar, that her voice calling his name across the fields no longer startled but steadied him, and as spring bled into summer, the ranch began to flourish again under their combined care, calves born strong, fences mended, the land alive with purpose, and with each day Samuel found it harder to imagine facing the frontier without her by his side, though still he kept his feelings locked away, afraid to speak them, afraid that voicing them aloud might break the delicate balance between grief and hope, love lost and love found, until one evening when the sun dipped low and the sky burned crimson, Samuel stood once more at Clara's grave, his hat in his hands, his voice breaking as he whispered that he was lost, that he did not know how to move forward, and behind him, Eliza stepped quietly into the fading light, her eyes soft with understanding, her hand resting gently on his arm, and in that moment Samuel felt a peace wash over him, as if Clara herself had given her blessing through the touch of her sister, and though neither spoke, the silence between them carried a promise, a fragile beginning, a seed of love that would one day take root, and as the night settled over the land, the cowboy who had thought his heart forever broken felt the first glimmer of healing, though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, and the winds of the frontier carried both trials and blessings yet unseen. And dear listener, if this story has touched your heart so far, if you too believe in love rising from sorrow and hope shining through the darkest nights, make sure to subscribe to this channel, for the journey of Samuel and Eliza has only just begun, and the next chapter will bring even greater trials, deeper emotions, and a love tested by the very heart of the wild frontier. As the weeks deepened into months, life on the frontier unfolded with both hardship and quiet triumph, for Samuel and Eliza found themselves bound together not by words spoken but by countless acts of shared endurance, riding side by side through the burning sun and the cutting wind, facing storms that split the sky with lightning and nights when the howl of coyotes echoed across the hills. And though Samuel's heart still carried the weight of Clara's memory, the presence of Eliza grew like a steady flame in the darkness, warming the corners of his soul he had thought forever cold. And yet love on the frontier was never simple, for every sunrise brought both promise and peril, and soon the challenges of ranch life would test not only their strength but the fragile bond growing between them, for the cattle drive that summer was long and grueling, miles upon miles of open prairie, rivers swollen with spring rain, and rustlers lurking like shadows at the edge of the herd, and Samuel, hardened by years of experience, led with a stern hand, but Eliza, though untested, proved herself with courage that startled even him, her small frame riding tall in the saddle, her determination unshaken by dust storms that choked the air or nights when sleep was a stranger, and in those long hours Samuel could not help but glance her way, seeing not just Clara's sister but a woman of her own spirit, fierce, unyielding, and alive with fire, and yet each glance was followed by a pang of guilt. As though his heart betrayed a vow carved in stone, but the land has a way of stripping away illusions, of revealing truth in the rawest form, and truth came one night when a storm rolled over the plains, thunder cracking like the sky itself was breaking, rain falling in sheets so heavy the herd panicked, hooves pounding, cattle scattering into the blackness, and Samuel rode hard, shouting into the storm, trying to hold the herd together, when his horse stumbled in the mud and he was thrown, pain tearing through his shoulder as he hit the ground, and in the chaos it was Eliza who turned back, defying the danger, her voice rising above the storm as she rode through the stampede, pulling Samuel to his feet, her arms steady around him as she lifted him onto her horse, and in that moment Samuel saw not just bravery but love, raw and undeniable, in her eyes, a love that asked no permission, gave no explanation, only burned bright in the storm, and though he said nothing, when the dawn broke over the battered land and the cattle stood weary but alive, Samuel knew something within him had shifted forever, and in the quiet days that followed, while his shoulder healed and Eliza tended the ranch with tireless hands, he began to realize that perhaps love was not a betrayal of Clara but a fulfillment of her last wish, for had she not asked Eliza to look after him, to see that he did not fade into loneliness, and perhaps in ways unseen Clara's spirit lingered, guiding them together. 4. Life must go on even when hearts are broken, and love, once found, cannot be caged forever, and so it was that Samuel, though still hesitant, began to let himself dream again, dream of laughter in the cabin, of children's footsteps across the porch, of a future where the land was not just a burden but a home alive with joy. Yet fate is never kind for long, and soon the peace they built was threatened, for a band of rustlers, men without honor, had been watching the ranch, and one night they came, riding hard with guns and greed in their eyes, seeking to take what Samuel had built, and in the crack of gunfire and the clash of wills, Samuel stood strong though outnumbered, but it was Eliza who proved once more the depth of her courage, standing beside him with a rifle in her hands, her aim steady, her heart unshaken, and together they drove the rustlers back into the shadows. The ranch defended not just with bullets but with the fierce bond of two souls who refused to yield, and when the last echoes of the fight faded into the night, Samuel turned to her, blood on his arm, dust on his face, and he saw in her eyes not just the reflection of courage but the mirror of his own heart, and at last he spoke the words he had held back for so long, that he could not live without her, that his heart, once broken, had found its way again in her presence, and though tears filled her eyes, Eliza smiled through them, for she too had carried the same love, the same fear, and now at last it was free, and under the wide western sky, with stars burning like candles of eternity, Samuel and Eliza sealed their bond, not with ceremony or witness but with the truth of hearts that had suffered, healed, and chosen one another, and in the days that followed, their love grew not in grand gestures but in the quiet moments that make life whole, the shared meals, the laughter at day's end, the dreams spoken softly beneath the cottonwood tree, and though Clara's memory never faded, it no longer haunted Samuel, for he felt she lived on in their love, blessing them from beyond, and so the cowboy who had once been broken by loss found a new bride, a new hope, and a new life beside the woman who had come not just to help but to heal, and their story became one whispered across the frontier, a tale of sorrow turned to joy, of despair turned to love, a reminder that even in the harshest land, the heart can bloom again. And dear listener, if this journey of Samuel and Eliza has touched your spirit, if you believe in love's power to rise from ashes and conquer even the wildest storms, then subscribe to this channel, for more stories of courage, loss, and love await, stories that will stir your heart and remind you that even in the loneliest places, hope still rides with the dawn.